So in the election of 1856, we actually have the creation of a new party where the Northern Democrats and the anti-slavery Whigs and the Free Soil Party decided to join together and create the Republican Party. And for their candidate, they chose John C. Fremont from California. The Democrats chose James Buchanan, who was a Pennsylvanian, who favored compromise, and the No Nothing Party went with old Vice President Millard Fillmore as their candidate. James Buchanan was actually able to win the South, and with that, he won the election of 1856. And during this presidential election, we also have the famous Dred Scott decision, formerly known as Dred Scott versus Sanford. Dred Scott was a slave, right, who belonged to an army doctor in Missouri, and the doctor brought Dred Scott along with him to Illinois, where slavery was now illegal. And that's where they lived for a number of years, and eventually the doctor passes away. Scott wants to petition for his freedom, and so he petitions the widow of the army doctor for his freedom. She denies it. Scott decides to actually sue for his freedom and against the army doctor's wife, because living in Illinois, since it is a free state, he feels that he no longer needs to be living in slavery since it's illegal anyway. And so lawyers helped Dred Scott to actually formally plan a suit against the wife. However, this goes all the way to the Supreme Court, where it's decided that Scott did not have a right to sue because he, in turn, was not really a citizen, and only citizens have the right to make any kind of lawsuits. The government can't really seize any private property without due process, so the government was not able to actually make any decisions on slaves because slaves were property. And you can move from state to state with my couch, for example, and the government can come in and take my couch from one state to the next if I moved it with me. And Congress cannot ban slavery in territories. So essentially, what this court decision did was that the Missouri Compromise and other decisions of popular sovereignty, where people had the right to decide whether or not they wanted slavery, were unconstitutional. Therefore, saying that abolishing slavery was pretty much unconstitutional. And that's why the Dred Scott case became so famous, and it really began to continue to fuel the idea of abolitionism throughout different parts of the country. During this time, we also have the very famous senatorial election happening in the state of Illinois, where you have Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas, who this time is campaigning against a new young lawyer named Abraham Lincoln, right? And these two decided to engage in what became known as Lincoln-Douglas debates, and they held a series of debates along the state right before the election. It's here where Lincoln actually gives his famous House Divided speech. And if you're not known with that speech, it's that very famous line where it comes from, "A house divided cannot stand," right? That's where he makes that famous speech during these Lincoln-Douglas debates. Lincoln was also one to claim that all blacks were entitled to the same rights as in the Declaration of Independence. Legally, they had the same rights. Now, it is something to know that even though Lincoln did not agree with slavery and agreed that blacks had the same rights under the law, he didn't really agree that blacks were equal to whites. That is something to keep in mind. Lincoln gained national recognition because of these debates, which is going to help him later on win the presidential election. But in this senatorial election, Douglas does win the election and continues to be senator. Douglas is also a proponent of what was known as the Freeport Doctrine, which he believed that territories could exclude slavery through local legislation. People within the territories could vote for themselves whether or not they wanted to exclude slavery or not.